Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20, and joining me to break down all the happenings in the world of rugby league in the NRL and for the Parramatta Eels, my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, it is never a quiet week in paradise, and even with the bye upon us in the NRL, there is plenty to discuss. But as always, before we talk football, let's talk about how everyone is. And I'll start with you, big fella. How's your week been? How are you travelling?
Okay, how's the week been? Cold, for a start. Still recovering from a couple of losses that we had to witness over the weekend.
Ooh.
And we roll into a weekend where the Eels get 2 points.
Woo.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it?
Oh, goodness. Yes, that's probably the nicest way of summing it up. It was a difficult weekend for a couple of our teams in the NRL and the New South Wales Cup in particular. But, yeah, we'll get to that with our weekend wrap. Clint, I hope you've been doing better than our 60s was, because he was out watching the collapse of the century out at Lidcombe Oval on the weekend. Did you fare better in your days off?
Well, I was following it on
Whoa. 60s, do you hear that?
I don't want to speculate. But Clint, are you in the bath recording at the moment?
Boys, you found me out. You've outed me on the show. No, I unfortunately the nature of my work and doesn't necessarily mean I'm always home at time or availability to consistent setup. So you've got me on the road, but not quite in the bathroom.
What a trooper joining us. Not even when he's at home. We got to tip our hats to Clint this week for putting in the extra or overtime shift on the tip sheet. So well done, mate. Good to have you on as always. And speaking of good to have on board, of course, that would also mean our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, NRL and Parramatta, who we always shout out because they're fantastic partners of both the podcast in the tip sheet as well as TCT in general. Love Greg and the crew and everything they do for us. And on that note, boys, we've thanked our sponsors. We've caught up. Let's start talking some football on the news podcast.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, let's start off with the first bit of news, which we'd have to look at as a genuine positive, and that's the potential release by the Storm of Jason Ryles so that he can make an early start at the Eels. We're not talking about him coming in and taking over the coaching from this point forward, but rather working on 2025 as soon as possible. So basically after all of the Origin stuff wraps up, that he comes on board hopefully within a week or two. I think he's already done a little bit of background stuff at the Eels. There was mentioned in the newspaper about the work that he had done during the previous week. But once he can start to focus all of his attention on what needs to be sorted out for the roster, for anything around the playing group for 2025 going onwards, I think the sooner the better. John?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way. I mean, it sounds like I'm labelling out a challenge here to the media, but I don't think there's any way you can spin this into a negative. If Ryles gets an early release from Melbourne and his duties there as the coaching coordinator or director, I believe, to join the Parramatta Eels early this year to start preparing for season 2025, that is a massive win for the Blue and Gold. He gets to be on board, getting a feel for all our structures, the talent that's available, who he wants to see more of in different across the three different grades, whether it's Flag, Cup, or NRL. He can get to start knowing his players, seeing what makes them tick, what makes all those little interactions that make a football team more than just the game day that fans see. So yeah, him coming on board early would be a huge win for the blue and gold. And I suppose the only negative, if you want to talk negative, is if the club has to start paying him early, and that's a corporate problem, not an actual football problem. So if he can get out from his Melbourne duties, I will be very happy. Like I said, get him on board, let him see the state of a roster, because there's a lot of talk about players that need to be moved on. He needs to see those players themselves to make an informed decision on that, whether he wants to keep them, thinks he can get more out of them, whether he wants to move on from them or from players that aren't being talked about. Who knows? That's part of the process. He's got a lot of young kids, Charlie Guymer, Matt Arthur, who are playing NRL right now. But then below that, you've got guys we always have been talking about, Jock Brazel, Saxon Pryke, Josh Lynn, Arpa Twiddle, Sam Tuivasa, Riley Smith, just off the top of my head there, and there's obviously way more than that. There's the whole Blaze Talangi situation and getting him re-signed as a Parramatta Eel. So him coming on board early would be a huge boon, and I'm hoping that it can be, if it's not already done, maybe the tip sheet and its listeners can will it into existence as we've been wanting to do in recent weeks, it feels like.
Clint, your takes?
Well, I've got one piece of advice for Jason Ryles if he wants to expedite this process, and that's to log into his computer at the Melbourne Storm, Control A to select all files, Control C to copy, Control V to a thumb drive. That'll very quickly expedite this process.
I thought you were going to go the Antonio Brown route from the NFL. For those that want to know what Antonio Brown did, it is a very funny process to get out of his contract, including calling his general manager a cracker. But he cryogenically froze his feet. He did a whole number of things. So that was scorched earth compared to what Jason Ryles needs to do, as Quint sort of pointed out.
That was next level. But hopefully JR Ryles, what are we going to call him, lads? Something to decide at a later time. But
if we call him JR, I can start busting out famous.
JR?
Or if we call him JR, I can start busting out famous wrestling sound bites from Jim Ross.
And the on top of that, there's the Dallas TV show reference there as well for some of our older listeners who'd probably be familiar with that very famous 80s drama, late 80s drama. For those that are a little bit younger, the Simpsons parody of Who Shot Mr. Burns, Who Shot JR. But no,
I think you're getting into a topical area that we probably shouldn't this week.
I didn't even make that connection. I think that's probably more a reflection on you at the moment, Sixties.
The political animal that is Sixties, yes, as we all know.
We kid, of course, but I think it's only a positive thing if JR can get here early, and the more time he has to observe, to take in, to absorb, much as like 40 said, the more informed decision he can make, and. It's probably just under 3 months until our preseason will start, or about 3 months until our preseason will start. So if he has that type of lead-in time, obviously he still has to decide his own staff and his own team that he wants to put together. I think that's, I don't know of anyone that's really had a 3 month lead-in for a job. I feel like that's starting off on not only solid footing, but it's a launch pad into his career as the Eels head coach.
Yeah, now what seems to be accompanying that, of course, is that the rumours have well and truly started. They've started with suggestions of players that are going to perhaps follow Jason Ryles from the Storm to the Eels. There was some ridiculous stuff that I think came from a fake website the other week, which was a couple of the younger Storm outside backs joining him, which was, as I said, off a fake website. We've then had the Bronson Garlick suggestion, and of course Bronson being a player who'd hit his 30s next year. And with respect to Bronson, he's had like 25, 26 first grade games and is about to get into his 30s. So if they did make signings like that, all you're really talking about, again with respect, is depth signings based on the previous experience of a player such as Garlick. You're going to have the rumours about which Eels players are going to be released. And again, let's face it, there are players who are off contract who aren't sitting at the top of the roster who will probably be released. So you can maybe take it as a given that there will be players that maybe haven't appeared in first grade this year that would be released. I think there was a strong suggestion about Zach Sini, for example, going over to the Super League. And that, if the player's off contract, there's not going to be too much of a surprise in that. But when it comes to big name, highly paid players at the Eels who are still under contract, yes, you are going to get rumours. And I think the reason you're going to get rumours is that for there to be any significant roster change, for them to go into the player market, they have to have the money. And the only way they can get the money is actually by releasing players. So I don't think it's not out of the realms that there will be players moved on. Fellas, anything you want to add to that?
No, just it reiterates the importance of getting JR or Rylesy in at the club to make as informed a decision on these things for him, rather than letting speculation run rampant in the media, because we've heard pretty much everything, that the club has said, X players free to negotiate, or that Y player has been told that they're safe. And the reality is that none of that's true, because the club doesn't really know, because there's a new coach in charge. So that, whether it's between media reports or the club saying one thing or another, getting Jason Ryles in there and letting that process start to cook is going to be big for the club. So, yeah, I'm not putting too much stock into anything we hear, Sixties, because right now the media have pretty much a carte blanche to write about what they want with our roster, and there's not much the club can do to refute. Like, they can put out statements and whatnot, but the reality is that without the coach fully installed yet, that the media are going to speculate with rampant and rife energy.
And Clint, of course, the other aspect is that for a player to be moved on who's still under contract, you have to find a destination for them. Then there's a negotiation about what sort of freight you might be able to get for a player to be moved on, and the coach and the club would then have to work out what is the benefit. If you're moving on a player who's, say, on 800,000 a season, and you've got takers at about 400, the club's going to carry freight for 400. So then and then they're probably only going to be able to replace him with another player where they're paying 400. So they're getting maybe getting a $400,000 player. This hypothetically, a $400,000 player for someone who had previously been valued at 800,000, and then you go, okay, and it's still going to cost 800,000, and that's the thing. If it's still going to cost 800,000, is there a benefit from moving them on straight away, or do they wait till they get a better offer, wait till the players finish their contract? All these things have to be determined. So it's not just a matter of tapping someone on the shoulder and saying you can go. If they're under contract, if the Eels want to get the best value, there has to be a destination for them.
Absolutely, and it's kind of the funny thing when you see online sports discussion where it kind of dismisses this fact. It has to be, everything has to be weighed on its merits, and much like you're saying there, 60 is a cost benefit analysis undertaken for every potential scenario. The potential player or players that may leave also have to be an attractive proposition to any potential club. So a lot of people go, I'd get rid of X player because they haven't been performing, and I don't like the way that they play and they don't suit our style, or whatever. It's like, yeah, well, they also have to be an attractive proposition for another potential suitor. So, all these things are factors that play in how these decisions are made. And, Coach Ryles might come in and go, you know what, I actually back myself to get everything out of player X and player Y, and but we're not going to be moving anyone on, or we might only be moving one player on, or we might be moving a third of the squad on. We don't know, and neither does the media. Much like Forty said, it's going to continue to be speculative news until Ryles' feet are under the desk, and we get a little bit more clarity by the virtue of time passing.
Yeah. So now so listeners are aware, we had a little bit of a pool that we're taking for this, where we've taken odds on the time that we can wrap this podcast up in. And right at the moment, the early betting is that 40's going to come in and romp in his bet based on the time that I've predicted. So, John, just on the first topic, even with us.
To be fair, this is a rather dense topic. You know, we're talking about the future of the club, players under contract. You know, closing the chapter or closing the book on such a huge chapter of Parramatta Eels modern history. You know, that run from 2019 to 2022 was, you know, iconic. I know we fell short of a title, but that was one of the real strong runs from any club that isn't the Penrith Panthers pretty much in modern times. And it just so happened to coincide against the Penrith Panthers. So what we're talking about here and shaping the future of the Parramatta Eels is very serious, hence why the run time and why I'm probably, you know, odds on to win the bet at this point.
Yeah, just so people are aware. I said as we were starting, I think we can get this done in about 50 minutes tonight, fellas. And John just said, I'll take over.
We just need a second half collapse like the Eels this season. Easy.
Okay, well, we go from the potential good news of Jason Ryles to terrible news with a couple more injuries over the weekend. In New South Wales Cup, we had an injury to Morgan Harper. Looks a bit nasty to the knee, but it may not be season-ending. Charlie Guymer looked to have a significant ankle injury, and the club hasn't confirmed the exact nature of it or what's happening, but my mail is it's not good.
He was hobbling up hobbling off the field, wasn't he? It's been a year where perhaps more than ever it feels like we just can't have anything nice. You know, the constant injuries to either core players or to rising young players, you know, it's enough to drive a fan crazy, let alone, you know, the people inside the club who have been dealing with this on the ground day to day and having it impact their jobs. But yeah, if Charlie is out for any extended time, that would be such a kick in the face for both the young man himself, for the team, and then for fans, because he was a real shining light for the Eels across his first two games. And as Clint was saying to us before we started recording in the green room, like, it's simple, it's very obvious, but yeah, this is an important time for those young guys and getting some first grade into them ahead of a new coach coming in and just getting used to the pace of the NRL, used to the contact, used to the grind. And he's been robbed of that by some real poor luck.
Yeah, it's not good, but let's now press on, because we're going to wait for any confirmation of that about Charlie. So, quick wrap up of the weekend, fellas. We had 5 Eels grades in action. We had 2 victories out of the 5. Starting off with the NRL, anything you really want to add as a final take out of that, Clint? I'll throw to you first.
Somehow, crazily, the game was much tighter than what the first 20 minutes felt like it was going to be. I felt like I was, you know, like a jilted ex-lover seeing my ex with someone else, and then going, oh, I'm better off without you. And then her showing a little bit of signs and going, oh, hold on, do we still have something? Only just to be like, oh, no, I understand why we broke up. No, it wasn't anything quite like that. But, you know, at the same time, you know, it was frustrating again, because it feels like the boys are trying, you know, I can't take that away from them, but yeah, we're just lacking that quality and that confidence at the moment. And, you know, I think it's probably as simple as we've forgotten how to win. Also, you know, it's pretty hard to win NRL games full stop these days. And when you're in the I've said it a couple of weeks in a row now, but when you're in the funk that we're in at the minute, it's really, really hard to get out of it. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, and take nothing away from these boys, because they're out there giving their hardest as well. It's hard to compete at NRL level when you've got some players that were playing Ron Massey Cup third grade at the beginning of this year. So, the nature of the competition, it's so fierce and it's so fast that the second that you have like I always say to people, if you're 1 to 2% off, anyone can beat anyone. If you're 3 to 4% off, you can be touched up by anyone. You throw into the mix there the injuries and the lack of availability we've had with players. It makes it really hard. Like we had a trial against the Gold Coast Titans at the beginning of this year where we had almost our full strength side out, and although that wasn't a big victory in terms of a trial victory, we rolled through them pretty easily and managed the game pretty easily. And you fast forward, 5-6 months on from that time, completely different circumstances and situation, and there was points in times where the Titans were doing that to us. So, it's hard to see where our next win comes from. To be perfectly honest, we've got a really tough run in for the next 4 or 5 games.
The run to the finals.
Can do a run to the end of the year, and it's just all we can hope is that they do their best, and they just try to build on performances, because although we were far from great, I did see plenty of effort out there against the Titans and some signs of encouragement of performances to build on. I thought it was Reg's best game of the year, or maybe second best game to our opening round win against the Bulldogs. So hopefully for some of those boys, even though they're not getting the W, they can kind of see something in their own performance that they go and build on.
Yeah, John, I look at it and I go, 3 things stand out from the game this week. There's still basic errors. There is still lack of polish, and there's a distinct lack of personnel.
Yeah.
Is that? I don't think I can sum it up any more straightforward than that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty succinct and to the point. And it's funny because in spite of all that, the Titans were still there to be beaten. And,
yeah,
that's both a reflection of the fact that this team still has some good talent in it. And I know that Clint rightfully pointed out that it is hard to win an NRL game, and that is very true. But, again, this year's competition, outside of maybe the top 2 or 3 teams, it just feels so like there's a massive plateau. Okay. Yeah. And we just...
And it feels open, games are there to be won, as you said there.
But when you put those combined factors that...
situation...
Sorry.
I was just going to say, this is what makes this situation all the more frustrating.
Exactly.
The quality that exists within this club that we, regardless of our circumstances, and I said this to 60 post-game, is that we should be doing better.
Yeah, but when you talk about the factors combined between what the two of you just laid out, it is funny how much confidence can cause a slip, more so than perhaps anything else. And don't get me wrong, the personnel issues are deep, and again, we've banged the drums on that plenty of times. But another game that we could have won, and I suppose the other side of it is that it could have easily been a blowout, and it wasn't. So our premiership hopes are not in tatters yet. We haven't had 50 points put on us yet. Although we do have Melbourne coming up the bye, so we shouldn't run my mouth too much. I'm happy to put this one in the books, boys, as another disappointing loss, and I suppose some more understanding than perhaps other weeks this year where no Mitchell Moses, no Junior Barlaw. The back line, like Clint said, you got a couple of guys that are playing Ron Massey or were playing Ron Massey in there. I thought Jake Tungle did a good job in his NRL debut, but both he and Lorenzo really struggled with both confidence because there were just some simple errors there, and then that's 1, and then 2, just containing the speed that Gold Coast backline has, and it's up there with the fastest in the competition, and they're able to take full advantage of that on Saturday night.
Yeah, the thing about having bringing in players who were outside of the full-time squad, especially for, and we're talking about that for most of the season, so they don't do the pre-season that the other players do. They're only part-timers, so that, Jake Tungle's had a decent run in New South Wales Cup this season for someone who started from outside of the group. Lorenzo's been in and out of the New South Wales Cup team you know, from that perspective, it's a big ask, and the fellas did, you know, decent performances from that perspective. But you can't expect players who have been graded at a level that's, you know, a number of levels down from NRL, who haven't done the preparation that the other players do, and that's a season preparation and a weekly preparation and a familiarity with the players that they're playing alongside of. I mean, their familiarity is from watching them on TV probably, and getting to have a couple of runs against them in training, where they've been able to train on some sessions as the years progressed. But you know, they just haven't had that familiarity with them. So I think they did okay. We can't point the finger at individuals like that for losses. We have to point the finger at the whole picture of where things are at in that regard. Just quickly on the lower grades, we saw the Jersey Flegg win their match against the Warriors. They were 4-1 in that match. Probably not reflective of the score. Didn't end up reflective of the difference between the teams, but unfortunately, it was a bit like the New South Wales Cup, where their second half was nowhere near as good as their first half. Left a few tries out there on the paddock. I don't know if I want to talk about the New South Wales Cup, John, because the Eels probably went from what was arguably their best half of football in the season to something which probably in the second half surpassed their effort against the Raiders in terms of
at least they had
diabolical.
the excuse of it being terrible conditions, therefore holding onto the ball was difficult. But yeah, like you said, Sixties, almost pristine opening 40 minutes here in which they scored 28 points, had complete control of the game. Muhammad Al-Madini on his debut had a really nice opening stint, scored the first try actually, by racing down the right sideline and beating a couple of defenders to plant the ball down. Ended up setting up the last try of the half for another young gun in Ethan Sanders. And then from there, the game finished. It didn't happen in the second half because the Eels obviously didn't run back out. They gave up, 42, 44 unanswered points?
42 points.
42 unanswered points in the second half. Yeah. And completely forgot how to play football. We saw some beyond, schoolboy errors from core players like Zach Sini. I think he had a drop kick, and then they scored in the next set. He held on to the kick, but then lost it in contact running it back, and they scored. And, all those things just, compounded on top of each other. They forgot how to tackle. They let offloads slip. They gave away silly penalties. They had a couple of chances to arrest momentum by scoring tries, and they fell agonisingly short of getting it. I think Josh Lynn had a chance to slice through the line after a great dummy and step, but then the defender stuck his hand out and just got enough of the ball to get him to drop it. And then he almost had the same play, but passed into Brock Parker a set or two later, and Brock had a barnstorming run to the try line, 15, 20 metres, breaking tackles and beating defenders. And then I think it was a bit hard to see from the angle, but I think he lost the ball on the line, which led to a 20-metre restart, and I think they scored from that as well. So, yeah, the second half was pretty much as opposite to a script you would put as a coach as you could possibly get. Like, if you're talking about... You go, mate.
Mate, the worst thing for me, and a lot of older listeners will relate to this, is that I don't recall ever going to Lidcombe Oval to watch the first grade team win.
Yeah.
I, in all honesty, I can't ever remember watching an Eels win at Lidcombe Oval in all the times that I travelled there when I was younger. And we're talking about in the Eels premiership winning era.
I think the flag are 2 from 2 in the last 2 years.
Magpies.
The Jersey Flag, I think, are 2 from 2 though. To be fair, they've played there this year.
Sorry, what was that?
Jersey Flag played there this year.
Yeah. See, I'm not counting Jersey Flag because we've two victories from Jersey Flag there last year and then this year that we've seen. We saw them at Easter last year.
Yeah.
It was. So we've had a couple of recent journeys
NRL
out there.
wise and reserve grade, not as successful. So I think
No,
we put that
no.
one to
So,
rest.
yeah, so look, as far as I was concerned, the Eels telegraphed where their headspace was at, because when the score climbed back from 28-4 to 28-16, so the Warriors are still 2 converted tries behind, the Eels had hands on the hips, heads down, and I thought, no, you don't. But yes, they did. It was, it was almost like they were resigned to giving up what was about to happen in the second half. That was probably, to me, the body language on the team was awful, just awful. Even when they were in front, just conceding a couple of tries, it was like they'd given up. And I mean, they probably hadn't given up, but it was almost like they were saying to the Warriors, we're worried here. Like, we don't think things are going good. It had to be, from that body language. It was the only interpretation you would take from as an opposing team. Fellas, I just want to quickly touch on the women's games on the weekend. I covered the Harvey Norman women's premiership team. Coach killer stuff in that game. It was a real mix of some terrific football in amongst the coach killer errors. I don't know what the completion rate ended up, but it wouldn't have been too high across the entirety of the game. Certainly, the number of errors, and it was quite a range of errors, including a number of times in possession with incorrect play the ball, that sort of thing. I thought the Eels were far more dangerous than the Dragons in the game when they were in possession.
Yeah, 7 line breaks to 4, and then 47 tackle breaks to 33 in favour of the Eels. So they created their fair share of opportunities.
Yeah. And we're going to have a quick team list Tuesday. I thought the Eels really asked lots of questions when Raf Perigo came onto the field. And I thought she was absolutely dynamic. I thought she took her game from the Tasha Gale up to another level in being in the NRLW. Again, she's only named on the bench this week. I just hope that she gets even more game time. She had decent game time last week, but I hope she gets even more. I thought she might have started this game, but and there's a number of changes to the team this week. Some interesting ones, especially around the forwards. Notice Dimmick was moved to, is she even in the, I'm trying to even think if she's in the 17, but we'll leave that for the team list part. But then, fellas, you might all be able to comment on this, because I'm sure you've seen the game with the NRLW. But for mine, there's been a lot of talk about individuals. I thought the standout for me was actually the difference in them as a team. Structure, speed of play, decisiveness of shifts, aggression in defence. They looked like a really cohesive unit in a trial game, albeit, but I thought that was the key thing for me. Clint, anything you want to add about the NRLW trial?
I think the most impressive thing was the defence. The NRLW not only finished last, but they conceded the most points by a fair margin in the most recent season. So, obviously there was a focal point for them to improve going into this season. And, although it's only a trial, the signs there are really positive. And, it's really great when you see a team work as a unit defensively. I think from an NRL perspective, that's something that we're certainly lacking at the moment, and we're hoping that JR will be able to bring in the off season. So, really good first initial signs there from a little bit of tautology from the Steve George Dallas coach side, and hopefully it is a sign of things to come.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I do think defense really stood out there. Elsie Albert leading the way through the middle. It was a good blend. We saw tough defense, opportunistic and aggressive attacking down the flanks. And the Eels weren't at full strength. Rachel Pearson not taking part in this one. in the halves, and she's one of the senior players in that squad. So good initial signs. Like, you never want to get over invested in a trial result, positive or negative, but especially negative. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe with the negative ones, you need to read a little bit into it if it's really bad. But a good win, you don't want to say, all right, we're premiership contenders. Who's going to stop us? Blah blah blah. But I think it was a really strong opening game under Steve Georgios' tenure here, and I look forward to seeing what the girls have to bring to the competition proper. Because there seems to be a pretty good balance in the team now that they've got players like Cassie Toihiku, more centered around the ball, and can tap into some talent that we know is in this team that probably wasn't fully realised in season 2023.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in watching the opposed session a couple of weeks ago, because you mentioned defence, the communication in defence and reminding each other of defensive goals, you could hear that out on the field. Now, whether that was a feature as well in the trial game, because I was only able to watch the replay of the trial game with being out at Lidcombe Oval for the lower grades. I was out at Granville earlier in the day for the Harvey Norman, but switched over to Lidcombe for coverage of Flegg. So if that communication was there, I thought that would go a long way towards improving the defence. Okay, well, that takes us out of the weekend wrap. And so, John, we've got a bit of an abbreviated team list Tuesday because we dropped from 5 grades back to 3 this week.
Yeah, but for some reason, I don't feel like there's a need to rush through this. I don't really know what's going on there. Just pace myself and go through nice and steady for these 3 team lists. You think that sounds right, 60s? No, but
yeah, I'm just glad we haven't got anything.
Actually riding on the line here, yeah. But Eels in action across 3 grades this week, boys. You pointed out 60s. No NRL, no NRLW trial, which means the Cup, the Flag, and then the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership, the 3 grades that will be on the field. We start on Friday night. It's a doubleheader out at Belmore with the Flag and Cup in action. Let's start with the Cup, the second game, 8 o'clock p.m. kickoff. You can catch this one on New South Wales Rugby League TV. And I believe we will have a blog up on TCT as well. So if you want to follow along, join us on the website. Eels, they haven't named the full team per New South Wales Rugby League, and we are waiting for the club to put out its team list. But it looks like on the bye, the club is being a little bit relaxed in terms of getting their team list out. There's no team list published on Parra Eels. So we start at fullback, Zach Sini. On the wings, Lorenzo Mulatalo and Isaac Lumi. Samuel Luiziu was the lone centre name this week. Morgan Harper, as you mentioned, 60s. We're expecting to be sidelined for a bit with a knee injury. And the Eels have not named a replacement there. But in the halves, Dejan Arce and Ethan Sanders will be working in the 6 and 7. Witter McGregor and Makahesi Makatoa, the bookends. Matty Alpha getting the start at dummy half. Dan Keir captains the team on the edge with Matt Dury coming back to play on the other side. Brock Parker is the starting lock forward. Interchange, Joey Lussick, Jock Brazel, Ofahiki Ogden, and Tony Mattielli. So a couple of players returning from long layoffs there, 60s and Clint. Ogden and Mattielli, a senior and a younger forward, in respectively there. For Ofahiki, it was a pec injury against the Dragons, I want to say. Was it the Dragons earlier this year? And then Tony Mattielli, I think he's had one of those dodgy hemis, and he's been out for a while. So some reinforcements to the forwards there. Looking at the Bulldogs team, Joash Papali'i is a talented young player that you probably heard a little bit about. They've got Hayes Perrin, former Eel there. Who else there? Chris Patolo, we've seen a little bit of. Liam Knight, solid NRL grade player there. So the Dogs got a bit of NRL talent there. They're sitting in 5th place on the ladder this week. So they took the Warriors' place after the Warriors jumped up on, not just points differential because they boosted that, but they're a win and a half ahead of the Dogs. So Eels look like that in Cup. Any comments, 60s? Who do you think is going to take that vacant centre spot? And would you have preferred to have seen some other players maybe picked in that back line, given we saw Moe make his debut last week?
Yeah, I think probably Tungor might drop back from the NRL into the centre spot, given that was where he was playing before. So unless he's picked up some sort of niggling injury, which would not surprise, then I think that's going to be the case. Look, I mean, whether they still have the potential to sneak into the finals. Now they've just made it that much harder for themselves. And to be honest, a team that plays like they did in the second half on last weekend, it's hard to find positives this week to talk about. But we'll be giving an honest preview on Thursday, albeit an abbreviated preview podcast. Look, I thought maybe they might have run Mohammed Alamuddin for a second week up there. You give him that experience, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Who knows? I mean, he might yet get a run there. I guess we'll see. But apart from that, look, I guess I'm a little bit disappointed about Jock Brazel coming off the bench.
Mm-hmm.
I like to see him get as much game time as possible. So, probably not too much else to say. Clint, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm the same as you, Sixties. I'd really like to see Moe get another game there. But, while we're continuing to go through this this ride of the season, if you want to call it as such, across all grades, it's within our best interest to get as many of those younger players that we have earmarked as potential future NRL players, as much senior football against men as possible.
Yeah. Okay, John, the flag.
Yeah, they're the big beneficiaries of those players either getting bumped down or getting less time in Cup, with the team looking like this against the Bulldogs. Harper Twiddle at fullback, Moe Alamuddin on one wing, Ollie McCarthy, who's had a really good start to his flag campaign, on the other, so a good set of flankers and a good fullback there for the flag. Antioch Faitala-Mariner and Araz Nava have been ultra consistent in the centres this year, so it's good to have them available again. In the halves, you see Matty Hunter and Josh Lynn partnering up. Front row, Sam Tuivasa, Riley Smith and Tinkin Brown. Back row, Raf Destratus, Tyrese Lakini and Saxon Pryke, so they get Saxon back from Cup duty, so a big boost in the forward pack there. On the interchange, it's Yaya Yachi as the dummy half utility, Max Tupou, Damascus Nemia, and Josiah Funa Iuta. Michael Abdo is the 19th man in this case, or the concussion sub. So good-looking flag team there. Got some reinforcements back from the Cup, and also some young guys really starting to make an impression on this team, in the likes of Ollie McCarthy, and then obviously Tyrese Lakini and Josiah Funa Iuta. And they're taking on a Bulldogs team. 6 o'clock kickoff out at Belmore, who actually topped the table. They've supplanted the Canberra Raiders. 14 wins, 4 losses. Equal record with the Raiders there. They're ahead by 25 points of points differential. So big challenge for our boys. They've shown they can hang with the likes of the Raiders and then the Knights in recent weeks, but not get the bickies. So this would be a huge one to have. And they sit 4 points adrift to the top 6. So they can't afford to drop this now. You potentially move 3 wins away from the top 6 if a loss here. So they've got to produce a mega upset.
Yeah, look, it's always been a case of pushing it uphill for both of the Eels lower grades after the start to the season, losing the first 7 of the year for the Jersey Flag. To be honest, for them to be only 4 points beyond the top 6 after being so far behind after the first 7 rounds is just an indication of just how consistent they have been in the middle part of the season. Yeah, like as you said, it's a big ask. What we have seen from them is an improvement in defence, because even in the second half last week, where the Eels were making a lot of errors, they still weren't being overly threatened by the Warriors when it came to, having their line breached. So it was the week before they did a shutout of South with a 46-0 result. Really, that it should have been to 0 again on the weekend. They just conceded like a ladies' try in that one. So if they can keep that defensive attitude up, then who knows, mate? Who knows? So Clint, anything you want to add?
Well, it's kind of not too dissimilar to the Jersey Flegg last season, the way that it's kind of unfolding. There was a big run and surge into the finals that ultimately culminated in a grand final qualifier appearance from the Jersey Flegg last year. And, it'd be great if they could not only replicate that effort, but go a couple of wins better. So, it remains a thrilling race for those boys, and it'd be interesting to see now with some of those troops, given that NRL's got the bye, some of those troops going back a grade, how they perform and how they fare.
And you know what? That's a fair comment, because the Eels did not hit the was it a top 5 last year, John, rather than a top 6? Anyway, they didn't actually qualify until the very last minutes of the Jersey Flegg season, because not only did they have to win, but they relied on a match going their way down in Melbourne.
That's right.
And
it
we
went
were
down
riding
to the last minute as well.
Yeah. It literally was a last gasp try. Was it by the Storm?
Yeah, by the Storm. We'd thought that had gone the wrong way, and we're resigned to missing out the finals. And then the New South Wales Rugby League website, Game Day Centre, updated after we sort of
typo.
Yeah,
it was a typo.
Oh, it was a typo. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So it was, and we got to see the reaction of the players down on the field when the result came through, so that their game finished, and then it was about another 5-10 minutes later that the other match finished, and the news filtered through that results had gone their way for them to qualify for finals football. So who knows, if they keep winning, it might come down to a similar situation this year. And finally, John, the Harvey Norman Women's Premiership match this week down in Wollongong.
Yes, taking on the Steelers, of course, in the Gong. They look like this. At fullback, it's Yasmin Baker. On the wings, Debbie Dwahi and Caitlin Pearden, who moves from the centres to the flank. In the centres, though, we have Kate Fallon and Aaliyah Hamano. Halves, no change this week to Lara Bamblett and Sarah Dimmick in the 6 and 7, respectively. Front row sees Aliti Namose and Tafoa Asua in the front row, alongside Chelsea Makira at dummy half. Chloe Jackson on one edge, Talisha Mayiva captaining the team on the other. River Lee Arlaw, another young talent, gets a look at lock forward. So well done to River. She coming off the 19's Origin showing 60s as well, where she was very good. On the interchange, you already mentioned her, but Raf Perigo, you got Lasalio Sita Payne, Raishi Fa'amasili, and then Ashley Pottinger. Extended roster, Liana Dimmick, Fontaine Tafua, Caitlin Stanley, Bella Sanford, Shay Shipton, and Tahila Vaulanga. So Eels making a few moves in the back line in particular there, but also in the forward pack as well.
Yeah, and as I said, I was a couple of surprises. Number one, I thought Raf Perigo might get a start in the run-on team, and secondly, I thought Dimmick had a reasonable game too in the forwards
she could
last
be
week. But,
injured, but she is in the 18th player slot, so who knows?
Yeah. And there were some late changes last week, so anything could happen there. But it's a matter of cutting down the errors this week.
Yep. And
you went through those stats from last week. So it's if they produce a game with fewer errors, they get the job done. If it's more of the same, then a similar result. So okay, fellas, we'll just move on. First of all, anyone that's interested in some vision on what's happening with the Centre of Excellence up there at Kellyville, I've been putting it on the Instagram account for TCT, but also there is specific vision of the big concrete blocks with the Eels logo on them that forms a feature wall at the Centre of Excellence. So if you head to the Eels official site, you'll get that vision there. So please do that. And the only other thing I want to mention as well as we round this off is a huge congratulations to 4 Eels Pathways players on their selection in the Australian Schoolboys team. So you've got Ryder Talangi, who is, of course, the younger brother of Blaze Talangi. Ryder plays in the forwards. You've got he's on the bench for the Australian Schoolboys team. You've got Lockie Kanikis, who was in the Eels SG Ball team this year. He is the starting dummy half in the game. You also have Tyson Sangalang, who was on the actually didn't start the season in the top 17 for the Eels SG Ball team, but worked his way into the 17 during the season and has had quite a solid year, and he's ended up winning selection on the bench for the Australian Schoolboys team. And then we've also got Lincoln Fletcher, who was the halfback for the Eels Harold Matthews team, who is the 18th man in that Australian Schoolboys squad. So congratulations to all of those players, and hopefully it's indicative of players that we can continue to follow as they progress through the Eels pathways. Fellas, any comments on those boys' selections?
Yeah, I mean, always.
Congratulations.
Yeah, always pumped to see junior Eels getting their plaudits or their flowers in other, grading competitions. And the Australian Schoolboys are certainly one of the most prestigious out there. So well done to the 4 Eels. Fletcher was a big part of our Harold Matthews team, and then the other 3 in Kainakis, Ryder, who was also part of the Harold Mats, and Tyson Sanglang, who were all big effort, big engine, good guys. So well deserved. And yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing them progress at the Parramatta Eels.
Absolutely. Now, I could guess as we come into 40's musical interlude, given that his prediction was that we come in well over 50 minutes in this podcast, he might be about to hit us with the side 1 of Dark Side of the Moon as his musical interlude.
I was going to be generous and say if we got the Parramatta Eels done in under 50 minutes, I'd give you the bet, but you couldn't even get that one done, mate. So no Dark Side of the Moon, although we could go for some, classic, it's not rock opera, but, classic rock at some point in the future. No, we've all been a little bit in our feelings, boys. And, the Eels are struggling along. They've lost quite a few games in a row. We've had so many injuries and setbacks. So I sort of got into my feelings and was thinking about, what songs make you just belt out the sort of sad tune. And then I was thinking of the 4 Non-Blondes and What's Up. And then I realized that the internet gave us a superior version. And I'm going to play the superior version, or at least a portion of the superior version. I want you guys to try and figure out what the cross-referencing universe or the cover comes from. So here we go.
And he prays. Oh my God, I pray. I pray to see your face. Forever will shout. And I say, hey, yeah, 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 yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah. I say, what's going on?
A chance for redemption, 60s. I will cede the bet on the length of this podcast if you can tell me what cartoon that cover, or what the internet geniuses created the cover from, based on what cartoon.
Well, look, what I can report is that Yoko was smiling and dancing. So it was relevant for her, but I've got not the slightest idea. I thought it was the Muppets at first.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, well, I appreciate that my memory has been enjoyed by a third party during the podcast. So that does salvage the situation a little bit for me. I have a sneaking suspicion Quinn might know, though.
My inner 80s child, even though I wasn't born in the 80s, unfortunately, still yet to see a premiership. It hurts every day. Is it He-Man?
Yes. One of the great internet meme videos for me was this rendition of What's Up by the 4 Non-Blondes, but in the universe of He-Man. And you enjoyed the dulcet tones of Skeletor going, yeah. There. So, Yes, hopefully everyone listening along enjoyed that as much as I did, which I doubt.
Yeah. So that explains why I had not a clue, because I don't think I've ever seen 1 minute of He-Man, the cartoon. So again, which gives away my age.
By the power of Grayskull. Come on, mate. Come
By
on.
the power of Grayskull.
Well, John, I'm going to throw it straight over to you for the weekend wrap in the NRL.
Yeah, split round with State of Origin taking place obviously tomorrow night, which meant that there were only 5 games across 5 games. It was 5 games. I can count 5 games with another 7 teams on the bye, and we started on Thursday night up at Redcliffe KO Stadium. Dolphins hosting the surging Rabbitohs, and the Dolphins prevailing 36-28 in an entertaining game. Then we went to PointsBet Stadium out of Cronulla, where the Cronulla Sharks thoroughly buried the West Tigers 58-6. Got a bit of controversy out of this one that you're going to walk us through. Sixties. I'd be keen to talk about that. Obviously, the Eels going down to the Titans up on the Gold Coast, 24-16. Then the Dragons nearly blew it. Nearly not quite a Parramatta Eels in the reserve grade, but they were up by a ton. End up winning just 30-26 over the Brisbane Broncos. And then the weekend closed out with the Sea Eagles hosing the Newcastle Knights 44-6 at Four Pines Park. Tommy Tebojevic returning to fullback just a week after coming back at the centres and sort of making it his plan to play in the centres, but then obviously injury forcing him back into the custodial role where he played a starring hand. So not in action, the Bulldogs, Cowboys, Panthers, Raiders, Roosters, Storm and Warriors. Like I said, it being the split round, the final split round of State of Origin. And then we're back to the competition as per usual.
Well, I think there was significant results there regarding the finals aspirations of teams, or just indicative of where teams are at. I mean, we've spoken at length about the Eels. The Tigers, well, I don't know what you can say, because they backed up a huge loss against the Roosters with that abysmal effort. To lose by that sort of score was disgraceful. The Broncos, where on earth are they at right now?
Yeah, if it weren't for the Eels, I feel like, and the Broncos are still getting hammered, but if it weren't for us shielding them somewhat in the news cycle, they would be getting absolutely destroyed, because their fall off from where they were last year is not just a grand finalist, but a grand finalist that had, 9 fingers on the trophy. And then they had, the greatest collapse in the grand final you'll see in the modern era, at the very least, if not all time in rugby league, to where they are now. It's crazy. For the talent they have in that roster, Sixties and Clint, it is crazy to see them drop off like this.
Oh, yeah. Because they've certainly had issues around injuries to halfbacks. But let's face it, the talent that's there in the rest of that squad, it just... like, those sorts of results should not be happening. And they may well bounce back. They might be able to bounce back and scrape into finals football. But this run of, 6 consecutive losses doesn't say a lot of good things about them as a team. And, it feels very reminiscent of how they finished off the 2022 season. Clint, what were your major takes from the weekend?
Well, apart from something that we're going to get into very shortly from the Sharks game, one thing that I'd like to thank the West Tigers for keeping us off the bottom for at least another week yet. But I'd also like to, we had a little bit of an 80s homage there with the He-Man interlude music. I appreciate the 90s homage the Sharks made with their retro jersey, the old Reebok style or sponsored style jersey from the 1990s that was sort of infamous, with David Peachy, Adam Dykes, and Mitch Healy. I remember those boys running around sort of the mid-90s. Same with the late and great Paul Green when he was the Sharks halfback. I thought that was pretty cool. Seeing that, I hadn't been keeping up with what everyone's heritage jerseys were for this year, so it was a nice little surprise when I tuned into that game, saw them wearing it. Likewise, much like you boys, I don't really understand where it is that the Broncos are at. Similarly, I'm not entirely certain where the Knights are at. They've been very up and down. And look, Forty and I banged this drum all throughout the off season. We didn't particularly rate the Knights, and I dare say it was a set of fortuitous circumstances that actually got them home against us when we played them up in Newcastle a few weeks ago. So Manly made pretty light work of them the other day. Again, we touched on it at some point in the early parts of this podcast, but the season is really there for someone who wants to stand up. I don't think it's a particularly strong season, which probably says a little bit more about our own team's fortunes at this particular point in time. But there's quite a few teams with some question marks on them and about them at the moment, and it's probably timely that some of the big name players and there's again news that we'll get into very shortly return for a number of teams, because we'll probably get a better indication of where their premiership credentials really are.
John, I just wanted to give a bit of praise. It's rare that I find myself applauding a Manly player, but one of the moments of the weekend for me was the inside pass after catching a crossfield kick from Eli Hopewadi.
That was slick, wasn't it? Yeah, that was smooth. Some serious football talent there. That was one of those ones that happened so quickly you almost had to blink to do a double take. Really hard crossfield kick. Usually the wing is going to back himself to just try and step past the cover defender. Instead he uses some slick hands. That was very, very smooth. Some impressive skills from Lehigh.
Yeah, it was. In fact, when I was watching it, I was thinking, is this a flick pass? Like it just came back, and then when you saw the front on from him, and you saw that no, he's passed the ball backwards, two hands, just so slick, so smooth with doing it. Just a bit of class. Now, we've already referenced that we were going to talk about this, but the Will Kennedy incident and suspension, real cross-section of opinions on this from the time that it happened. John, what's your take? Did you see it as an accident? Was it something that should have been suspended for? Where do you see it?
The referees and their positioning's been in the spotlight for a lot of this year, including the Eels the other week, where Quinton Gufferson was impeded against the Newcastle Knights, and seeing not just Will Kennedy getting punished, but seeing the double down from the NRL gave me a couple of movie reactions where I could go to Liar Liar or to Zoolander.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
What is going on? He's sitting down a week for that. On first viewing, you can sort of think that maybe he ran into the ref, and there should be more onus on him to be, I suppose, having eyes everywhere in support play. But if you go back and look at it, the referee actually steps across to the right and gets in his path as he's trying to push up. I understand that referees can't exist, beyond the physical plane inside the field there. They need to be somewhere. And I also agree that if any player ever touches a referee in a manner that is trying to intimidate or be disrespectful or be aggressive, then the hammer needs to come down. But where's the common sense, man? The referee stepped across into his path. Will Kennedy's pushing up in support, trying to make a play in attack, runs into him. He's already taken a penalty by not being able to support his player with the ball. Let's just play some football. Let's move on. I'm not upset at the referee. I'm not upset at Will Kennedy. That is a football incident. Use some common sense. And when someone is a dickhead to the referee, drop the hammer on him. Give him a season ban. That'll stop any... If you want to talk about sending a message to lower grades downwards about how positive interaction with the referee, you can't... Because that was Annesley's big thing, is that you're setting a standard for other grades. Then, set the standard in NRL and in lower grades as well. If anyone is a dickhead to a referee, they're gone for the season minimum. That whole sequence blows my mind. That Will Kennedy is now missing a game for doing his job as a fullback.
Well, Clint, the messaging from Annesley was basically about line in the sand, about setting standards for lower grades and junior and park football. We had a post the other week from Robbo about the taunting and gamesmanship and, the sorts of things that actually end up being rewarded in the game via, getting a reaction out of a player and then that player being penalised. So when you've got sledging from the likes of Reid Marnie, he's drawing penalties, he's lauded and giggled about in the media, he's earns penalties for his team, and yet in the code of conduct, it very specifically says that sort of behaviour is not to be tolerated. And yet, as I said, you see there are actually rewards for that behaviour in the NRL rather than consequences. And now we've got this situation where there is what has to be, on viewing, accidental contact with the referee that has resulted in a suspension because, as Aneltili says, we want to set standards that are there for other levels of football. Are we losing the plot here?
If I had to answer it in one question, I'd say, in one word rather, I'd say yes, because it's a very interesting hill to choose to stand on. There is a plethora of examples of other misconduct. Not just throughout the years, but throughout this year that could have been picked as an example to go on that verbal tirade and to take this stance. It speaks very much like a frustrated football boss there in Graham and Mannersley in choosing to do that. It sounds like these. The pressure has hit boiling point or tipping point, whichever you'd like to call it, on a number of different stakeholder fronts there, and it's kind of culminated in this. And it's like we have to come up with a justification for it. But by all intents and purposes, it looks like. Again, upon second viewing, because I wanted to quickly view it before the show tonight just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. It does look like a simple accident. I don't get picking this moment, particularly when you cited some of Reid Marnie's conduct there, Sixties. Likewise, we've seen throughout the years players being aggressive in terms of on-field violence, and I get that's largely been curbed with the threat of sin bin, send-off, suspension, etc. But it's a very intense game, rugby league, and tempers do flare, and we still do see. Maybe not necessarily full-on punch-ons, but we do see outbursts of such. So, I don't get picking this as your shining light example of this. We're not going to cop this, particularly when you consider the way that that some players as well interact with officials. So, it doesn't quite sit right with me, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, what's going on behind the scenes that led to this response.
Yeah, I think when, as Forty said, it's a game of football. It's very clear to see when players are doing something which is untoward regarding the referee. Accidents happen out there on the field. You referenced the getting in the way of Clint Gutherson the other week, and obviously Gutho didn't knock the referee off his feet, but there's nothing malicious that's happened there, and I don't know if that should be what happened. What happened should be the line in the sand. So, very tough call on Will Kennedy, I believe there. And just before we go on to the other big news, being some inclusions this week, some returns to football of key players. John and I spoke about the actions of Philip Sammy in his try celebration doing the Gutherino. And, the suggestion is he just been a bit of a knob with it. And he's since come out and said he loves Clint Gutho. He's the man. And Gutho acknowledged that. This is on the NRL roast. when it was showing the Gutherino there and making comment about it. And Philip Sammy actually came onto the NRL roast, made his comment about Gutho being the man, and Gutho basically acknowledged his comment and was all friendly with it. And I guess do we take it then as a homage?
Well, I'll tell you what,
celebration?
if that's what Philip's like when he likes you, I'd hate to have him as an enemy. No, I mean, whether it's saving face or whatever, you can obviously buy into whether you're not, but the fact he's come out and said it, I will pay it at its face value, and you say, okay, he's having a bit of fun with Guffo, and if that's the case, then it's cool. I got no issues with that. If both players are saying that's how it is, then I will take it as they say it. Before we move on to those return 60s, one thing I did want to throw into the run sheet, and not to pad out the run time to my bet, but 2GB were reporting.
I think you've won already.
Yeah, 2GB were reporting earlier today that they've heard, and this is via Ben Fordham, who's their lead NRL reporter, I believe, and presenter, that Perth is now scheduled to join the NRL in 2027, followed by PNG in 2028, with announcements to follow or to come in the following weeks now. So big expansion on the horizon if he's right. And be interesting time for the Eels if Brad Arthur ends up being linked to either franchise, and what that means in terms of recruitment and whatnot. But we cross that bridge if and when it happens. 20 teams in the NRL within a few years, kind of crazy.
Yeah, and look, to be honest, I'd back BA to get the job in Perth.
Well, the media
Honestly
seem
would.
pretty strongly about linking him to the role. So I wonder if there's already been some pretty well developed discussions in that regard. And he'd be a good for a team building from literally nothing. I think that he'd be a great appointment in that regard for Western Australia.
Well, I think when there's been some stories done on Brad Arthur and the family, it's been referenced that Brad's wife Michelle didn't grow up with a rugby league background because she came from Western Australia, came from Perth. So
even got some roots in the area too, so it works out nicely.
Yeah. So there'd be her family, I would imagine, over there. So it's I would say it's a very strong chance that that would happen. And I guess if he does get it, the interesting thing would be whether he looks to recruit any current or former Eels players for the start of that franchise. When were they looking at that being them being entered again, John?
Perth in 2027, and then PNG to follow over next year. So some rapid fire expansion within 2 years there, or within 1 year, depending on how you want to phrase it. We got 25 to play, 26 to play, and then first team comes in 27, second team comes in 28. So could be an entire seismic shift of the player market and landscape in a few years. Going to be very interesting to see how the NRL handles this.
And is that Perth team the franchise in conjunction with North Sydney?
2GB didn't specify, but the way it's been reported, I would say so, because it's been sold as a joint venture, playing some games at North Sydney or in Sydney.
Well, look, I guess we've got this as a topic for a future podcast about whether the talent pool is there to jump out to 19 and 20 teams. Fellas, I'll get a quick answer from you on that before we go on. A quick yes or no. Is the talent there to expand to 20 teams within 3 years, Clint?
No.
John?
No, it's not.
Not conventionally. I think teams are going to have to take more risks on young players if that's the way the NRL is trending towards. So it'd be very interesting for the competition in terms of which teams can adapt the best to, scouting out younger talent and being aggressive in that regard. And I think you're going to see more teams building around a smaller elite core with a lot more, whether it's reserve graders or young guys filling out the rosters.
Okay, and now speaking of elite talent, we've got some big ins this week. Jamal Fogarty, Nathan Cleary, and it's a big one for the Broncos with Reynolds returning. I guess we're going to see how much of a difference that he makes. Clint, how significant for each of those teams?
Well, I mean, Penrith's been going along pretty well without Nathan, to be honest. So, but at the same time, he's an elite playmaker, and he's proven his worth over the last 4 or 5 years at the NRL level, and he's missed a lot of this year. But it seems to be the case the last few years with Penrith that he's missed a few games, sort of in and around the Origin period, or this year even preceding that. Leaving him just fresh enough for a finals assault and to guide them to a premiership. And it just, if history's to repeat itself and the Eels are anything to go by this year in terms of their lack of luck, well, and use the narrative that I just placed for our audience here, can Penrith be more lucky? I'm not necessarily suggesting that's exactly what's going to happen, but the pattern seems to have taken place and been established, I think, at least the last 2 seasons. Is it going to be third time lucky in that regard and a 4th premiership for Penrith? I don't know. I hope not, with them being a rival. Additionally, Fogarty makes the Raiders a stronger team. He had a pretty decent start to this year before he picked up his injury. And likewise, Adam Reynolds is a proven performer in the NRL, and Brisbane are a significantly different side with him out there. It's been said for the better part of the last 2.5 years that he's like an assistant coach out there, or even a head coach out there for them. I think if he's fit and is able to get through those sessions and take his place on the field at Newcastle, I think he makes their chances not only all the more stronger, but I think it helps position Brisbane for a late tilt at the finals themselves.
John, who's the most significant inclusion out of those, in your opinion?
I mean, in the context of saving a season, I think it's Reynolds, because the Broncos are clearly in free fall right now. I think the most interesting inclusion is going to be Jamal Fogarty for mine, because that Canberra team will now have Fogarty at 7, Strange at 6, and KO Weeks at 1. And not even from a Parra perspective, but just following a young Parramatta talent that's going there in Ethan Sanders. It's going to be very interesting to see how that combination plays out for the rest of the season and what that means for next year for him. So I'm going to be interested to see how they go for the remainder of this season. But biggest inclusion for their team, I think, is definitely Reynolds. Best player coming back is Nathan Cleary. Most interesting is Jamal Fogarty.
Yep. Sounds like something I couldn't disagree with at all there, mate. And I wonder as well too, because Canberra hardly setting the world on fire in recent weeks. They've had a bit of an up and down season. They're still in contention for finals football, but Ricky only just signed an extension, didn't he, for his coaching? And
Correct.
This may well be another season where they don't qualify for finals football, but he seems quite safe down there. Nothing wrong at all with their recruitment strategies. They've been picking up some of the best young talent out there, seems like they're specifically targeting the New South Wales under-19 lineup. So I'm sure they've got a strong future. Whether they have the right coach might be a matter of disagreement from people. I guess if you're much loved down there and revered as a former legend player, you've got a little bit of extra error space, I guess, for how your team performs. Fellas, we don't really have time for an in-depth Origin preview, so with the big decider on tomorrow night, let's just get some tips. Clint, who do you tip and why?
Well, I'm nervous to say New South Wales because it feels like we're falling into the same old traps. There's a little air of nervousness around Queensland at the moment, and certainly some external pressure being applied and some suggestion that even Coach Billy Slater isn't exactly where he's used to being and feeling the pressure. But when game time rolls around, it's normally water off a duck's back because those Queenslanders just find something, and particularly at home and in a decider, it's hard to go past them. That being said, I think this is New South Wales' best opportunity to win a decider in Queensland for quite some time. There is an air of confidence about them, and from a selfish perspective, it'd be great to see Mitchell Moses be able to have that moment and replicate not only what he did in game 2, but to take it into the cauldron in a decider and to bring the trophy home. I think that would once and for all quieten all his probably lingering doubters that exist now. So, but that being said, to answer your question, 60s, unfortunately, I think Queensland will be just a bit too strong and find that inner Queensland energy, that inner 10 and extra 10-20% that they just seem to find when they're up there, and be able to bring it home in a close one. I'm going to call it 18-10.
Okay, John?
Don't know the score, but New South Wales by 1 point off Mitchell Moses' field goal, with Zach Lomax getting a crucial try in there somewhere.
Okay, well, I think we see spoiling tactics from the Queenslanders. They worked out that the ways to get nullify the Blues' speed of play, especially around the rucks. So, yeah, as I said, I think we see a bit more wrestle and niggle and just yuck play from the Queenslanders. I think it's going to be a toss of the coin, this one. Just purely to support the home state with a couple of Eels players. Well, it should be 2 Eels players next year in the team. I'll go for New South Wales winning, and I'll pick a score line of 26-22. So I think it'll be about a 4-point margin. Well, fellas, we're at this point now where I feel a bit embarrassed about my tip about how long this podcast will take, because I think we are probably heading closer to the 90 minutes than the 50. Would I be right there, John?
Yeah, we actually crossed the 50 for just the Parramatta section, so 121 and a half as we finish up recording.
Totally not intentional from 40 or I to draw that out either.
Yeah, so fellas, another fine effort from you two. Thank you for that. Thank you to our listeners. Again, we appreciate all the positive feedback that you give us, and we do get plenty of messages sent to us in support of what we do. Thank you to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta, Greg and the crew. Make it possible for us to do what we do every week, well, 3 times a week, with the podcast and then all of our other content on the Cumberland Throw. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.